We feel it's time for a paradigm shift, Arthur. A more agile leadership structure. Julian Croft leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished mahogany of the boardroom table. He wore a Brioni suit that probably cost more than my first car. His tie was a slash of aggressive silk. He was 38 years old and had the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. Across from him, his father-in-law, Alistair Croft, the company chairman, nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. They thought firing me would be the end of the story. They were wrong. My name is Arthur Chambers. I'm 55 years old. And until that moment, on a Tuesday afternoon, November 15th, 2024, I had been the president of the Advanced Materials Division at Starkweather Industrial for the last 12 of my 28 years with the company. I built that division. I took it from a speculative $10 million R&D project and turned it into a $1.2 billion behemoth that generated 62% of the company's net profit last year. "We appreciate your service, of course," Alistair mumbled, finally looking at a point on the wall just over my left shoulder. "Decades of it, but the market demands disruption. Julian has a vision for digital integration that—" He trailed off, waving a hand vaguely. Julian picked up the thread, his voice smooth and condescending, like a pre-recorded message. "It's about optimizing our human capital for the next generation of growth. We're offering you a generous severance package. 6 months' salary. Standard procedure." He slid a thin folder across the table. Security guards, 2 of them, stood impassively by the door. The humiliation was a carefully staged piece of corporate theater. I didn't open the folder. I looked at Julian, then at Alistair. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. My breathing was even. Years of managing high-pressure supply chain crises, of negotiating with hostile governments for mineral rights, of staring down union leaders during contract talks. It all came back to me in a wave of dead calm. They saw a loyal old soldier being put out to pasture, a piece of legacy infrastructure being decommissioned. They had no idea I was the one holding the signed treaty. What they didn't understand was that this scene would not be remembered as their triumph. If you like stories where corporate karma delivers a receipt for decades of hard work, and where competence beats connections every time, hit that like button and subscribe right now. I've got a lot of stories about the quiet guys in the background who turn out to be the ones holding in all the cards. I started at Starkweather Industrial in 1996. I was 27, fresh out of the Army with a degree in chemical engineering and a head full of logistics protocols. The company was a respectable, mid-sized manufacturer of industrial polymers. Alistair Croft had inherited it from his father, and while he was a decent salesman, he had no real grasp of operations. The place ran on legacy systems and the institutional knowledge of a few old-timers who were nearing retirement. I was hired as a junior process manager. My first project was to overhaul the inventory system for the primary manufacturing plant in Gary, Indiana. It was a disaster. They were using a paper-based system that was losing them something in the neighborhood of $3 million a year in misplaced stock and spoilage. I spent 6 months living out of a motel, working 18-hour days, mapping every pallet, every drum, every process from loading dock to production line. I built them a new system from the ground up, a simple database that tracked everything. In the first year, it saved them $4.5 million. Alistair sent me a $500 gift certificate to a steakhouse. That set the pattern for the next 28 years. I was the guy they called when things were broken. When a plant in Malaysia went down during a typhoon, I was on a plane. When a supplier in Brazil tried to renegotiate a critical materials contract, I was the one who flew to São Paulo and stared them down. When we had a chemical spill that threatened to become a PR nightmare, I was the one on site at 3 a.m., managing the cleanup and keeping the press out. I missed my son's 5th birthday because I was in Germany closing a deal. I missed my daughter's high school graduation because a fire at our Houston facility threatened to halt production for the entire Gulf Coast division. My wife, Sarah, understood. She didn't always like it, but she understood that I was building something, a future for us, a legacy. In 2012, the company was in trouble. A bad bet on a new consumer product line had failed spectacularly, and the core business was stagnating. We were ripe for a hostile takeover. I was getting calls from headhunters every week, one with an offer from a competitor that was almost double my salary. I was 43 years old, president of the North American operations, and I was ready to leave. Starkweather felt like a sinking ship, and Alistair was too proud to admit he'd steered it into an iceberg. He called me to his office. It was the same boardroom where he would fire me 12 years later. He pleaded with me to stay. He knew I was the only one who understood the operational guts of the company well enough to right the ship. He asked me what it would take. I told him I didn't want more money. I wanted a mission. I laid out my plan for the Advanced Materials Division, a high-risk, high-reward venture into proprietary composites for the aerospace and defense industries. I told him I wanted to run it, and if I succeeded, I wanted the top job, the CEO position. He agreed immediately, too quickly. That's when I called my lawyer, Elias Vance. Elias had been my father's attorney, a sharp, methodical man who believed in the sanctity of the written word. We met at his office, a quiet place filled with the smell of old books and leather. I told him about Alistair's offer. Elias listened patiently, his fingertips steepled. "A promise from a desperate man is worth the air it's spoken into, Arthur," he said. "We will get this in writing, not in a letter of intent, in your employment contract, an amendment." He drafted it himself. It was a masterpiece of legal precision. It laid out a 12-year path to the CEO role, contingent on my performance as president of the new division. The milestones were aggressive but clear. Milestone 1. Achieve profitability within 3 years. Milestone 2. Grow divisional revenue by an average of 20% year over year. Milestone 3. Secure at least 3 major long-term government or aerospace contracts within 5 years. Milestone 4. Maintain a divisional net profit margin above 15% for the duration of the contract. And then came the secret weapon. Section 14, subsection C. Elias called it the disloyalty clause. He insisted on it. It stated that if the company failed to appoint me as CEO upon the retirement of the current CEO, provided all performance milestones had been verifiably met, it would constitute a material breach of contract. The penalty for that breach was a liquidation payment, a sum of $18 million, payable immediately. Furthermore, a separate clause, Section 9A, stipulated that in the event of my termination for any reason other than gross misconduct, all of my 450,000 shares of performance-based equity would vest immediately. "Alistair will sign this because he's desperate today," Elias had said, tapping the document with his pen. "In 12 years, he will have forgotten the precise caliber of the weapon he's allowing you to keep in your desk. But paper, Arthur. Paper remembers." Alistair signed it without a fight. His lawyers glanced at it, but they were focused on the non-compete clauses, not the penalty section. They saw it as a symbolic gesture to keep a key executive. They never imagined I would actually hit every single target. But I did. I hit them all. We were profitable in 2 years. Our average revenue growth over 12 years was 28%. We landed contracts with Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and the Department of Defense. Our net profit margin never dipped below 18%. Every year, during my annual review, I would bring a binder. In it was the data, the charts, the signed contracts. I would walk Alistair through my progress against the milestones outlined in my 2012 contract, and every year he would sign my performance review, a document that explicitly stated, "Arthur Chambers has successfully met or exceeded all performance milestones for the fiscal year as detailed in his employment agreement dated August 4th, 2012. I have 12 of those signed reviews, locked in a fireproof safe in my home office." Julian Croft arrived about a year ago. He'd married Alistair's youngest daughter, a woman whose primary accomplishment was spending her trust fund. Julian had an MBA from Wharton and a resume that was a collection of impressive-sounding but ultimately meaningless titles at a series of failed tech startups. He was appointed Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. His real initiative was positioning himself as the heir apparent. He walked the halls in his expensive shoes, carrying a MacBook Pro like it was a scepter. He talked about synergy and disruption and creating value propositions. He couldn't read a balance sheet, and he didn't know the difference between carbon fiber and fiberglass, but he knew how to make a slick PowerPoint presentation. He treated me with a kind of patronizing disdain. To him, I was the old factory foreman, the guy covered in grease who kept the machines running but couldn't possibly understand the big picture. He never once set foot on a factory floor. He never met a single client. He just sat in his glass-walled office and theorized. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago, when Alistair announced his retirement at the annual shareholder meeting, he didn't name a successor. The next day, Julian started holding meetings with the other division heads, meetings I wasn't invited to. He was measuring the drapes. The breaking point came in the boardroom. After they delivered the news, I stood up. I didn't say a word. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out. The security guards fell in behind me. The walk to my office was the longest of my life. People I had worked with for decades looked down at their desks, pretending to be busy. They knew. The whole company knew. They gave me 15 minutes to gather my personal belongings. A cardboard box. That's what 28 years of your life comes down to. I packed the photos of my family, a few books, the ridiculous Manager of the Year plaque from 1999. As I was leaving, my assistant, a young woman named Maria, whom I'd hired 5 years ago, slipped a flash drive into my hand. Her eyes were full of tears. "They're deleting your network drive," she whispered. "I copied everything from the last 12 years. Your performance reviews, the divisional financials, just in case." I nodded my thanks. I already had the hard copies, but her loyalty in that moment was a small island of decency in an ocean of betrayal. I drove home in a daze. The world outside my truck window seemed unreal. When I walked in the door, Sarah took one look at my face and the cardboard box in my hands and knew. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the signed contract from 2012 on the desk in front of me, its pages illuminated by the green glow of my desk lamp. Section 14, subsection C. The ink was faded, but the words were clear as day. The next morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, I called Elias Vance. He was semi-retired, but he still kept a small office. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the faint rustle of paper. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Do you still have the original contract? And the signed annual reviews?" "Yes, Elias. All of them." "Good," he said. "Let them celebrate their victory. Let the boy king have his coronation. Arrogance creates blind spots. We'll let them walk right into the trap they set for themselves 12 years ago." Over the next 2 days, Julian went on a victory tour. He sent a company-wide email announcing his appointment as the new CEO. It was a masterpiece of meaningless corporate jargon. "I am humbled and excited to lead Starkweather Industrial into a new era of dynamic growth and innovation," it read. "Together, we will leverage our core competencies to unlock new synergies and achieve market leadership." He probably had a consultant write it for him. He attached a new photo of himself, professionally lit, looking thoughtful and visionary. He posted it on LinkedIn, where it received hundreds of likes from other people who spoke the same empty language. He started making immediate changes. He announced a plan to divest from 2 of the smaller, but still profitable product lines in my old division to refocus on digital-first initiatives. It was a catastrophic mistake. Those product lines were essential suppliers to our largest aerospace client. Divesting from them would violate the terms of our contract with Boeing, a contract worth $200 million a year. He didn't know because he had never bothered to read the contracts. He was trying to look decisive, but he was just being ignorant. Meanwhile, Elias and I were preparing. It wasn't an investigation, it was an assembly. We took my 12 signed performance reviews. We took the divisional financial reports for every quarter since 2012. We took Maria's flash drive and printed out the key emails and memos where Alistair had praised my work and acknowledged my progress. We cross-referenced every single achievement directly to the milestones listed in the 2012 contract. We built a binder, 3 inches thick, that told a story of promises made and promises kept. It was an undeniable, documented record of my value and their impending breach. On Friday, 3 days after I was fired, Elias sent a single, polite letter, via courier, to Starkweather's general counsel, a man named Robert Paulson. The letter was short. It formally notified the board of a material breach of my employment contract, specifically citing Section 14(c). It requested that the liquidation payment of $18 million be wired to my account within 72 hours, as stipulated. It also noted the immediate vesting of my 450,000 equity shares under Section 9A. It concluded by stating that we would expect confirmation of the share transfer from their brokerage by end of business on Monday. The response was predictable. Paulson called Elias blustering. He said it was an absurd claim, that the board had every right to appoint the CEO they saw fit. He offered to increase my severance to a full year's salary in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. He was treating it like a standard negotiation. "Robert," Elias said calmly, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it on speakerphone. "This is not a negotiation. It is a notification of a contractual obligation. I suggest you locate Mr. Croft's copy of the 2012 agreement. My client and I have our original. We look forward to your compliance." He then hung up. The silence from their end was deafening. I imagined the panic setting in. Paulson digging through old file servers. Alistair trying to recall the details of a document he signed over a decade ago. Julian oblivious, probably picking out new furniture for his new corner office. The call came on Monday morning. It was from Paulson again. His tone had changed from arrogant to terrified. He requested an emergency meeting of the board for the following day, Tuesday, at 10 a.m. He asked that Elias and I attend. We walked into that boardroom exactly 1 week after I had been fired. The mood was different. The air was thick with tension. The same board members who had sat silently while Alistair and Julian executed me were now shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Alistair looked 100 years old. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his water glass. Julian, however, was still radiating arrogance. He sat at the head of the table, the CEO's chair, and gave me a smirk as I entered. He clearly thought this was some last-ditch effort on my part to beg for a better severance. He thought he had already won. "Gentlemen," he began, "I'm not sure what the purpose of this meeting is. The board has made its decision. We're moving forward." Elias placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 quiet clicks. He took out 10 copies of our meticulously assembled binder. He slid one in front of each board member, one in front of Alistair, and one in front of Julian. "The purpose of this meeting," Elias said, his voice filling the silent room, "is to address the material breach of Mr. Arthur Chambers' employment contract, dated August 4th, 2012, a contract signed by every member of the Compensation Committee at the time, including you, Mr. Croft." Julian scoffed, but the other board members began flipping through the pages. I could see the dawning comprehension on their faces as they saw the signed contract, followed by 12 years of signed reviews confirming that I had met every single condition for the CEO's succession. Elias walked them through it, his tone that of a professor lecturing a particularly slow class. He pointed to the milestones. He pointed to my documented achievements. Then he turned to the final tab in the binder. Section 14, subsection C, the disloyalty clause. As you can see, Elias continued, the contract is unequivocal. The board's decision last Tuesday to terminate Mr. Chambers and appoint Mr. Julian Croft as CEO constitutes a clear and deliberate breach of this agreement. Therefore, the remedies outlined in the contract are now in effect. Julian's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of uncertainty. This is ridiculous, he stammered, looking at his father-in-law for support. This is ancient history. We have the right to appoint leadership. That authority ends where a binding contract begins, Elias said coolly. He looked around the table at the other board members, who were now staring intently at the documents, their faces grim. The terms are as follows: a liquidation payment of $18 million, and the immediate vesting of Mr. Chambers' 450,000 performance shares. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. As of this morning's opening bell, Starkweather stock is trading at $88.50 per share. That makes the equity portion worth $39,825,000, for a total obligation of $57,825,000, payable immediately. The room held its breath. The only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC system. The color drained from Julian's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Alistair finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. This will bankrupt us. We can't pay this. You can't afford not to, Elias countered. Because if this payment is not made, our next step is to file a lawsuit for breach of contract, a lawsuit which we will undoubtedly win. And when the details of this board's gross mismanagement become public in discovery, when your shareholders learn that you willingly triggered a $58 million penalty to install an unqualified family member as CEO, I suspect the subsequent lawsuits from them will be far more damaging than this payment. The power shift was palpable. It was a physical change in the room's atmosphere. The board members, motivated by the primal instinct of self-preservation, turned their eyes from Alistair to me. They were no longer his allies. They were men looking for a lifeboat. One of them, a man named Henderson, who ran a logistics conglomerate, spoke up. Is this contract, is it ironclad? He asked, looking at the company's general counsel. Robert Paulson, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. I've had our outside counsel review it. It is unambiguous. We are in breach. Julian slammed his hand on the table. This can't be right. I'm the CEO. I spoke for the first time, my voice steady and measured. No, you're not. Your appointment was the act of breach. It was never legitimate. Henderson nodded slowly. He looked at Alistair with undisguised contempt. Alistair, what have you done? He then looked at the other board members. I move for an immediate vote to rescind the appointment of Julian Croft as CEO. Seconded, another director snapped. All in favor? Every hand, except Alistair's and Julian's, went up. I move that we authorize the payment to Mr. Chambers as stipulated in his contract, to be executed by the end of the day. Seconded. Again, a sea of hands. The enablers had found their new allegiance. Finally, Henderson looked at me. Arthur, in light of this catastrophic error in judgment, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I let the offer hang in the air for a moment. I looked at the panicked face of Julian and the broken expression of Alistair. I saw the desperate, pleading looks from the men who had watched me be humiliated a week earlier without saying a word. Thank you, but I decline, I said calmly. My employment with Starkweather Industrial was terminated last Tuesday. I am no longer an employee. I am simply a creditor, and as of this afternoon, a significant shareholder. I am here to collect what is contractually mine. I stood up. Elias closed his briefcase. We turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage behind us. The wire transfer for $18 million hit my bank account at 4:17 p.m. that afternoon. The confirmation of the stock transfer arrived in my email from my brokerage firm an hour later. I was no longer an employee. I was free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The $58 million payout had to be disclosed in the company's next SEC filing. The stock plunged 30% overnight. Alistair was forced to resign as chairman in disgrace to avoid being thrown out by the furious institutional investors. His legacy was not one of a company builder, but of a fool who let nepotism destroy shareholder value. Julian Croft was a ghost. He was scrubbed from the company website within hours. His LinkedIn profile was quietly updated to independent strategy consultant. He and Alistair's daughter separated 6 months later. Last I heard, he was selling luxury real estate in Florida, living off whatever was left of his wife's settlement. The board, in a desperate attempt to stabilize the company, hired an outside CEO, but the damage was done. The story of their incompetence leaked to the Wall Street Journal. The best engineers and managers in the advanced materials division, loyal to me, began sending me their resumes. 6 months later, I used a small portion of my payout to launch a new company, Chambers Composite Solutions. I hired away Starkweather's top 10 talents. Within a year, we had poached 2 of their major clients, including a piece of the Boeing contract that Julian's strategic divestiture had put in jeopardy. We were smaller, more agile, and we were built on competence, not connections. My personal life was restored. Sarah and I took a long trip to Italy, something we'd been planning for 20 years. I was home for dinner every night. I helped my son with his business school applications and taught my daughter how to change the oil in her car. The constant, grinding stress that had been my companion for 3 decades was just gone. It was replaced with a quiet sense of peace. Sometimes I sit in my new office, which overlooks a small lake, not a parking lot. On the wall is a simple frame. It doesn't hold a diploma or an award. It holds the original 2012 contract. A reminder. They thought a promise was something you could forget when it became inconvenient. But a signature on paper, properly witnessed and notarized, has a perfect memory. Your value doesn't disappear just because others are too arrogant to see it. Sometimes you just have to present them with the bill. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so, and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. And please, leave a comment letting me know what you think. Smash that like button.